Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Migrating to Magento 2 with Ease. I think we'll just wait another few more seconds to allow everyone to join the webinar. Right, hello again. Let's start with the webinar on migrating to Magento 2 with Ease. My name's Louise Lensner, and as Envica's marketing manager, I'll be your webinar host for today. Magento 1 is heading into its end of life, so no improvements will be made to the platform, and support will slowly start to decline. So really, now is the time to start making decisions about your next steps. Before we get started, I've just got a couple of housekeeping remarks. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll obviously be sharing the recording with you after the webinar. Please do ask questions during the session. You can do that through the GoToWebinar panel on your screen, and we will try and answer all of the questions at the end of the webinar. So who is Envica? And well, you might know us under the Session Digital name, which is because 18 months ago we unified the Session Digital brand, Envica, and the ICOS brand into Envica. So we're a technology partner and specialise in e-commerce, content management, and digital innovation. When it comes to Magento, our track record goes right back to the beginnings. 10 years ago now, we became one of the first Magento commerce partners in the UK. We're a member of the Magento Global Solution Partner Council, and we're on the Magento Certification Advisory Board as well. Obviously, with lots of Magento certifications under our belt, we're of course a Magento 2 trained solution partner. And over a year ago now, we were selected as one of just a handful of partners to take part in the Magento 2 beta program before its general release. And as part of that, we've launched the UK's first Magento 2 sites with Byredo and snacking company Graze.com. Here are a few more of our clients, but really enough about Envica. Let me introduce you to your speakers. With me today, I've got Stephen McNairn, one of our key senior project managers, and he's been with Envica for 7 years, and he's worked in e-commerce for the last 15 years at least. Stephen has a track record of delivering complex e-commerce, content management and innovation projects for some of the leading brands in the UK. And I've also got Paul Soberg with me today, who is our Magento solution consultant. And only this week he's received his Magento 2 Certified Solution Specialist certification, which only a handful of people have in the UK. Paul has been at Envica for 4 years, focusing on high-end e-commerce projects, and he's been working in e-commerce for the last 9 years. So, Stephen, over to you.
Thanks, Louise. Just to start us off, I thought I'd give a quick summary of what we'll be covering over the next half hour. Firstly, is why Magento 2 is a good option, and why now, and what's happened to lower the risk of that migration recently. Then we'll spend a bit of time talking about planning and preparation for a Magento 2 migration, with a bit of a focus on risk management, and we'll go into some of the specific things you can do about lowering risk on a Magento 2 migration. And then we'll spend a little bit of time at the end talking about innovation and things to do to help innovate on your new platform. And I kind of want to hand over to Paul initially to start the conversation going, because I believe when we're talking about Magento 2, there's been some changes to some of the language that used around the platform. We used to have the idea of the Community Edition and the Enterprise Edition, and that's all changed a bit now. So Paul, could you give us a bit of an overview on that?
Yeah, that's right, of course, can. So Magento has simplified the naming. They have renamed the community edition to open source, so that's called Magento Open Source, and that's obviously to bring in the community and highlight that Magento is actually an open source product that invites improvements from the audience, from the community. The Enterprise Edition is now been renamed Magento Commerce, and Enterprise Cloud, which is the platform as a service solution that they released last year, has now been renamed Magento Cloud. So it's all simpler product naming, and it also allows Magento to acquire new partners, acquire new solutions, and deliver more solutions such as Magento Analytics, when they acquired RJ Metrics last year, which provide great analytics solution for Magento. They got Magento Shipping, which will be released in 2.2, I believe, in the coming months, which is actually their partner Temando, which is a global fulfillment partner, and then Magento Social, which is another partner to provide Facebook store directly integrate with your store, online store. You also got B2B as well. That's part of that suite of commerce modules or products that Magento offers.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. So perhaps we can take a few minutes to talk about the kind of core product itself. So why don't you give us a bit of an overview on why we should be considering Magento 2 at this time? So around the features and what the new platform offers over and above Magento 1.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So there's been quite a bit of improvements. Some is easy to see with the eye, and some are behind the scenes. So, for example, it's improved performance. You now can split out on Magento Commerce. You now can split out the database into 3 separate subsystems, so that you can have a separate system for the checkout, the product management, and order management, and that allows you to obviously push more traffic, more transactions through your site. The admin panel, which is obviously a lot, you can see, is completely responsive and touch-friendly. And it's better, more intuitive, so it's easier to find your various options, which Magento 1, it was sort of a bit clunky over time. So yeah, so you can use your iPhone on a Friday night and you've got full access to the whole Magento admin panel with no loss of functionality. The front end has been redone. The checkout is a big improvement on Magento 1. You got assume guest guest checkout, which allows you to dive straight into the checkout to improve the conversions. They have more native features, so I have mentioned, for example, analytics. So Magento Analytics provides better reporting. With Magento Commerce, you have a base package included in the price. You have the Magento Shipping, which will come included. Obviously, the service charge it, but the extension is included. The B2B will come with Magento Commerce. So there's more functionality, and there's a clear roadmap where more will be added. In terms of the code base, it is much more modern. It's a modern code base based on modern development principles, which make it easier and less costly to maintain going forward, and also easier and more cost-effective to add functionality. And yeah, I think obviously, as I highlighted with Magento Cloud as well, you now have got to offer, so you still can do your self-hosted, but Magento Cloud solution is really good and provide a platform as service included with your enterprise licensing fee, which means you don't have to worry about scaling on your Black Friday. It's sort of taken care of by Magento Cloud.
Great. So yeah, it's a compelling feature set. I think we do have to be a bit upfront that actually moving from my Magento 1 to Magento 2 is not a simple upgrade. It's not like a point upgrade from the old platform. We are looking at it being more of a platform migration project. So perhaps you can give us some of the reasons behind that, Paul.
Yeah, sure. So probably already indicated why already is it's a new code base. So it's much more modern code base. It's redeveloped, which means that any modules or custom development you had for M1 you have to redevelop for your M2 site. Same with the front end. You know, obviously, if you have a really newly designed site, you don't have to redesign your site, but you still have to create a new theme for your M2 site. If you're an M1 developer and you use the Magento 1 way of doing things, it might take a bit of time for you to learn how to deal with Magento 2, because it is a new system really, and it is a more modern way of doing it. But obviously there's some something that, you know, there's tooling there to help you to migrate to M2 and develop with Magento 2, which we'll touch on a bit later. But I guess with any project, success to your project is down to careful planning, and would recommend, you know, going through discovery for it. But I'm sure you'll talk more about that, Stephen.
Yes, indeed. But I think there's as you mentioned, Paul, there's a few things that do mitigate the risk of this a bit. So although it is a migration project, fear not, there are some things that Magento have done to make the path a bit easier. Again, Paul, would you be able to give us a quick overview of that?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the Magento is Magento, so although the admin is new, you don't really have to do extensive retraining for your staff, for your customer service team, etc., because you still have the same order management flow. For example, you can still manage your customers. The product admin screen, you know, how you manage products is slightly different, but it's still Magento. You know, you can still add, remove attributes, etc. So that's going to be familiar for your team, and it provides more features. So obviously, B2B functionality is a big one. We know lots of Magento 1 clients or merchants that we work with that have to either use custom functionality or module to provide B2B. With actual Magento Commerce, it just comes with it, you know, as standard. And more importantly, for the migration, you have the data migration tool, which allows you to migrate all your data from M1 to M2 quite easily, especially compared to moving to a different platform. So yes, it's not all bad.
Great, thanks, Paul. So I think that gives us a nice view of where Magento 2 is at the moment, and the reasons why now is a good time to consider your migration. What I'd like to do is spend a bit of time now talking about setting up a project and preparing for your Magento 2 project. And a lot of this has come from my experience of doing platform migrations over the last few years. So before you do anything, really, I think the key thing is when you're looking at it being a migration rather than an upgrade, you need to have your strong business case in place for it, and you really need to understand what your goals are for this migration. For example, you may want to reduce costs from your back-end processes. You may want to be looking to capture new markets, increase conversion. You really need a very clear driver for why you are going to take on this project. And really the main reason for having this in place is because you're going to be taking on a fairly sizable project that will come with the need to make some decisions along the way around priority and what features are key to take across. And having that clear goal and that clear vision in place as to why you're doing this makes that a lot easier. So the first step is really to understand as a business why you want to do this migration, and from there you're going to make informed decisions based on the data from your analytics and feedback from customers, etc. And we'll touch on that a bit more in a moment. But another thing I think having that strong business case or that strong set of goals provides you with is the opportunity to find ways to release as early as possible. Any sort of platform migration project like this, we encourage customers to get it deployed into production as early as possible, so you can begin learning about how your back office team are using the platform, or how your customers are using the platform, and from there you can start making decisions about where to invest in new features and things, and hopefully avoiding this sort of fairly monolithic task of rolling out an entire new platform in one go. Which brings me to something I would like to challenge, a bit of a myth that I think has built up on within sort of the e-commerce space over recent years when people have approached migrations, and it's this idea of lift and shift. And this is a term I've heard used more often these days, and it's basically looking at your existing site and saying that site in itself represents the scope of your project, and you just want to move it across to your new platform. And I think a lot of businesses and a lot of technology partners have fallen into the trap of thinking this is a lower risk option, when actually it's easy to end up having a situation where a lot of incorrect assumptions are being made across both parties as to why these features and why this functionality exists. And also what ends up happening is you can spend a lot of your project budget on replicating things that perhaps don't add a great deal of value to your business. And actually, if you looked at adapting things like business process or ways of working to mold to the new platform, rather than purely replicating pre-existing functionality, you're going to have a lot of waste there. So that's something to be very conscious of. The other thing about lift and shift I think is important to highlight is that the focus of the business still remains on the old platform. And actually, you're in danger of losing a lot of the benefits that are available to you from moving to the new. So I think it's a much better approach to find ways to identify really sort of high-value things on the platform at the business level rather than at the feature level. And then what you want to take on in these kind of projects is ways of migrating that value rather than migrating just simply a feature set. If I was to give an example of the type of thing I'm talking about here, it might be if we're looking at the business-to-business functionality, you could be in a position where previously you've built up thousands of price lists, for example, for different customers. Now, you've got an option there. Do you then recreate that entire pricing structure within the new platform, or do you take it as an opportunity to rationalize that pricing approach while retaining the value it gives to your customer base? So it's these kind of decisions I think are important to make, and it's that kind of analysis that's important to do up front, rather than just thinking, I want this exact website to be reproduced on this new platform. And as part of that as well, I think it's a good opportunity to have a cleanup as well, especially when we talk about Magento platforms, where Paul and I will both have experience of seeing Magento 1 platforms with hundreds of modules that have been installed over a number of years. It's often time to maybe to review that set of features and those modules and see whether you actually need them anymore. Paul, perhaps you can give us a bit more of a view on that.
Yeah, sure. So very often, as you said, because you had your Magento 1 platform for 3, 4, 5 years, maybe even longer, you have installed modules in the past which probably is no longer used, may not have been updated for 3, 4 years. There might be security issues and quite likely performance issues in certain areas. And this is sort of clogging up your current site. And yeah, it's a great chance when you re-platforming or migrating to M2 to just look at what all the modules are used for. Do you actually need it? Is the better functionality out there, or actually does Magento 2 provide this functionality natively? And for example, if we look at B2B, which we used as an example a few times, in Magento 1 you had to have a custom modules or a customization, but actually now if you're on Magento Commerce, you have B2B functionality just as standard. So yeah, definitely a great way of just clearing out all your old modules and start from scratch.
Great, and I think it's worth highlighting as well that when you when the Magento 1 sites that have a lot of modules in place, it actually has a performance impact as well. So a lot of that code is being executed, and if it's not being used, that can have a performance and a stability impact on your site. So yeah, it's a fantastic opportunity to clean that up and to take full advantage of some of the performance gains you can get from M2.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Great. So continuing the journey from building your business case and starting to pull together the business needs for this type of platform migration. I'm going to touch now on some of the requirements and some of the requirements definition pieces that we need to do as part of this kind of thing. Starting with really, it's a great opportunity to really start to do a review of how the platform is used. I mean, that's the starting point for any requirements gathering piece in my experience. So a great thing to do is to do a proper deep dive in the analytics about how your site is being used by your customers. And from that, you're kind of wanting to highlight how it's used and how and what features aren't being used as well. So it's trying to identify those things that are driving revenue, helping you reduce costs, or potentially giving you a competitive advantage over other people in your sector. So by doing that kind of analysis, you can see, well, do things like wish list, for example, or a my account area really give you an advantage or really drive business for you. And if they don't, then it's not necessary to put huge amounts of investment of your delivery budget into these spaces. I mean, they're just two examples, but it's very contextual for each individual business. But it's worth going through that process. And in addition, get customer feedback. Use this as a time to do your surveys or use some of the tools like Hotjar or things like that that are going to help you identify real customer feedback and real customer use of the site, and use that to help drive the decision making about what it is you need to migrate to the new platform. And again, something else that I'd like to challenge, and this will be my final challenge of the webinar, is something again I've seen a lot over recent years, is the use of Moscow as an approach for describing scope for any sort of e-commerce project. It has its place. Moscow, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a way of ranking features, whether it should be must have, should have, could have, and won't have. By the nature, I think it's a very reductive approach, and it takes us too soon into the into talking about features rather than talking about value. And I think there's something about the way these kind of documents are put together where they'll often be given to one person within the business, usually IT or the e-commerce team, to go and gather all this information, and then you often have a sort of bidding war between different departments in the business as to what can be classed as a must-have. And there's a temptation to reduce how complex certain things are to make sure that they fit on the Moscow document. So I think it definitely has its place. It's very good for platform selection and high-level planning. But really, when you're starting to drive out your the scope and your requirements for a project like this, I'd recommend different approaches like story mapping. Story mapping is something that the Invika team use as part of our discovery process, and it's just a way of taking slices of full user journeys through your system and driving out what we're familiar with in the Agile community is user stories from that. It's a better approach, it's a workshopping approach, and it's also very collaborative in nature, and it cuts across business functions as well. So it's about businesses, it's about those different departments actually sort of collaborating a bit more and identifying those different touch points. I could do a whole webinar on story mapping, and I would probably need to go into a lot more detail. We will put a link up at the end of the webinar, and we'll include, when we send out the recording, some links as well that can give you a bit of an introduction to some of these things. But just really to say there are alternatives to Moscow, and yeah, story mapping is definitely a good one. When you're starting to build out those kind of requirements, I think it's worth highlighting something we talk about here a lot around commodity features. I mean, I touched a bit on this earlier, but really there's features that users expect to be on an e-commerce platform, or features that don't really give you any sort of differentiation. I think earlier on I mentioned things like the My Account area. I mean, another example in the e-commerce space is something like Store Locator, which again, it's very contextual. For your business, Store Locator might be a real differentiator. It might be something that you use to drive footfall, and it is worth investing a significant amount of your budget on delivering a good store locator. However, you need to make a conscious decision as to whether it is or not, rather than just blindly burning budget on these things that possibly won't be giving you a competitive advantage. So as you're driving out those requirements using things like story mapping, be conscious that it's good to find ways to not spend money on these type of features, and that might be adapting what you do to now to fit the existing platform, or it might even be not delivering that thing at all. It might not actually be necessary for you to get an advantage over your competitors. So I'm hoping I'm painting a bit of a picture of how you would build up get the journey from goal setting to driving out a backlog and understanding your requirements a bit more. From then on, as you approach delivery, I think the key thing I'd like to highlight in this webinar is that one of the most important things about platform migration projects is risk mitigation. Again, I could do a whole webinar on managing these type of projects, but the key thing is how do you manage that risk to the project? Your e-commerce platform likely touches many business critical systems. You might have it integrated with warehousing, with ERP. In some cases, for pure e-commerce players, it is the key customer touch points. It is the main place you're interacting between yourself and your customer base. And something else I see is a lot of the business context and the business processes that have grown up within your organization over the last few years will be baked in to this platform. So it's touching lots of areas, and therefore you've got to get it right. And projects like this can be expensive if you're not managing that risk appropriately. So I want to highlight a couple of areas in my experience that I've seen risks realized in these kind of builds. And then we can look at some ways of mitigating that. And the biggest one is really third-party dependencies. So you've got the things that are inside of your control, but there are many other people who will be involved in the rollout of your platform. That will be from ERP to analytics to payment gateways, etc., etc. There's a lot of different areas that will be touched outside of just the delivery of your Magento 2 platform. So there's an obvious question there. There's an obvious point there, is that you need to make sure and do some due diligence that these people support Magento 2 and that they've got some experience with Magento 2. And really the key risk mitigation for this is getting people to take responsibility. So that's both inside of your organization and within your partners. Make sure very early in the process you've got people who are owning this migration on both sides and that they're handling that risk. It's when you don't have those clean lines of contact, a clean responsibility in place, that you can see difficulties emerging on this, and do it early. And again, touching a bit more on the theme of release light and release early, what can you not deliver for go live? It's always worth investigating what perhaps isn't needed either for go live or perhaps not at all if it's not adding a great deal of value to the business. And yeah, the other part that I've seen cause difficulty in these kind of migration projects over the years is around delivery of the front end and delivery of UX and design. I think the easiest way to highlight this is for me, front end design and UX is an ongoing process. It never stops. People who are very successful in the e-commerce space are constantly building and evolving on this and rooting it in real data and real analytics. To take on a full redesign and a rebrand at the same time as migrating the technical platform you're on adds a significant amount of risk. Often because when you get designers involved, you end up getting scope creep through design, and new features will appear out of that design process. So all these full UX overhauls are great projects to do and are very important. Doing it simultaneously with a replatform like this perhaps adds additional risk. So rather than going out and getting a whole set of new PSDs done, you're much better in these instances of maybe getting a brand guide or a style guide in place, and working closely to ensure that there's quality there where it counts, particularly if you're working in the sort of luxury brand space, making sure the brand is beautifully represented on the new platform, but not getting tied into design and PSD and a design approval, because that will extend and can potentially open additional risk to your to the rollout of your new platform. You only get one, maybe two goes at a replatform over a long period of time, so that's the thing to focus on, really. Okay. And moving on from sort of mitigation of front-end risk, another area we would normally highlight as being a very risky part of a platform migration would be around data migration. You know, there's often a lot of effort put into this, but this is where the sort of the really good story starts coming around the M1 to M2 migration. Is that a lot of this work has been de-risked by some of the tooling that Magento provided us with. Paul, would you be able to give us a kind of oversight of that?
Yeah, sure. So the data migration tool is actually really good. You can it helps you migrate your data from any version of Magento 1, both community and open source or commerce, to the Magento 2 equivalent, and it allows you, like traditionally, probably for data migration, you know, when they come in from a different platform over to, for example, Magento, we wouldn't recommend necessarily to import historical orders, because it adds a lot of complexity and risk to your migration. However, with this migration tool between Magento 1 and Magento 2, you can actually migrate your orders, your customers, your products, and your contents, you know, with ease, your promotion rules, etc. With ease, it does it for you. Now, there's still some effort involved for your developers, so they still have to set up the scripts. The time it will take and the complexity of it will depend on how many different modules you use in the customization you're doing, and whether the M2 equivalent of the feature is implemented in a slightly different way. But basically, when they do the migration, they will get flags on what they need to fix or change. And once they've done that, you know, you can do your base migration of your data, so you can develop against your against proper data, which is really valuable for a developer. And then once you towards the end of your project, when you get close to go live, and actually no, they go live, you can do a delta migration, which will basically pull in all the data that you have on your live service, and that means the migration tool, you know, will help you really easily to move from M1 to M2.
Great, so that's fantastic, and I think the final part on risk mitigation really is around setting up a very strong test strategy as well, and Paul, you've got lots of experience with this too, haven't you?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So here at Enrica, we do work in Agile and quite often in Scrum when it comes to projects. So we'll have sprint cycles of 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the team and the project. And we have dedicated QAs or testers that does the testing in the sprints, and then we also encourage our clients to get involved, the product owner, to test during the sprints, which means actually when you come into the end of the project, you know, when the client is doing the final UAT, it's not a big surprise. You know, it's not like any discrepancy of what they expect to what they get in. There's no issues with data, etc. And we can quite likely fast track that UAT phase because it's sort of pretty much all tested. Along with that sort of testing of the features, they also have regression testing, you know, like making sure that because you introduce a new feature in a latter stage of the project, that hasn't broken anything in the earlier stages. For example, integrations with your ERP, your order management system, custom payment gateways, etc. We add automated testings to ensure that we have it coverage, so like we get to flag it automatically if something breaks when we introduce a new feature. So yeah, there's various testing. Obviously, we do browser testing, etc. But obviously, one of the key points is to test early, test throughout your build, and don't leave it all to last minute.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, I hope we're painting a picture here of a journey that's taking you up to deployment. I kind of want to wrap up by looking a little bit about innovation and what you can do post go live. So I think one of the nicest ways of explaining how to innovate and how to innovate in the digital space is looking at the Kano model. Now, the Kano model is a theory of product development. It was developed in the 80s out of Tokyo University by Noriaki Kano, and it's a way of looking at features and how features are used by users and what they get for and what users get from them and what excites them. And he describes on a 4x4 space matrix. On one axis, we've got how satisfied the user is by a feature, and on the other axis, we've got how well that feature is executed. And by mapping different features on this, you can see that there are the basic things that users expect. This is touching on that space of commodity features we spoke about earlier on. And in many ways, these are the sort of cost of entry features that you have to deliver. Now the thing about these types of features, these basic features, is actually customers don't even notice they're there most of the time. An example of that might be add to cart. They just expect it to be there. So no matter how well you execute it, you're not going to excite users by that. However, if you deliver it badly, then customers are very dissatisfied by that feature. So it's about understanding where the best investment is on that and how many of those basic features you need. The next type of features are performance features, and those features are basically the better you implement them, the more satisfied the customer is. In the e-commerce space, I'm thinking things like checkout. I would consider to be a performance feature for most businesses. In that, if you do a very seamless, beautiful checkout, it is satisfying to the customer. So these are the things that it's worth investing in to do well. But the third piece, and I think the really interesting one here, is what is described as exciters, or you'll often see them described as delighters as well. And these are the types of features that a very small, light execution of these features will start to delight your customers immediately. And then the more and more you invest in those exciters, the happier it makes your client. So these are the types of features that are the innovative ones, those really new things that you've maybe not tried before. And you can actually try at quite low cost and see if they delight your users. And when you find out that they do, then you can invest and do really sort of deep versions of those features, and they're so exciting to users. They're great for things like capturing market share, winning new business, increasing conversion, all these things that we want from an e-commerce platform that give us that edge in competitive markets. So what's the kind of lesson behind this is you'll have a limited development budget. All businesses in some way or other are constrained by their budgets, their time, and in some ways energy as well. Big projects can take a lot of energy for people to take on. What you want to do is make sure that once you're live, you have budget left and you have energy left and time left to invest in innovation. And then by doing very small pieces of innovative work, you can then find out what's going to delight your users and then invest more in those to actually start capturing market share. So this goes back to the thing we mentioned at the start of the webinar about all types of migration projects like this. It's really important to get it live as early as possible. So it's finding that way of finding what we often refer to as the minimum viable product, the lightest possible thing that you can go live with, that then enables you to really start to learn, to start gathering data, to start getting feedback from staff and from customers, and then to start investing additional budget in those things that are really going to start exciting your users and exciting your customers and hopefully bringing you in a big increase in revenue. So yeah, that's us to the end of the main part of the webinar. I hope we've painted a picture of why now is a good time to move to Magento 2. Yes, it is a migration project, but there's a lot in there that make it easier than other types of migration projects. So I hope that's a takeaway people have seen. And then there are things you can do to structure your project to make it easier and to really take it as a real opportunity to assess how your business is using your e-commerce platform, assess how your customers are interacting with your platform, and take it as a great opportunity to move the business forward. And I think at that point we can probably hand back to Louise for some questions.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Stephen and Paul. I think that was some great insight. We've got a couple of questions through as well, which we'd like to answer still. So, Paul, probably for you one. What about all the Magento 2 issues that we hear about? Are there still any, and how are they being addressed?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, yeah, so probably you heard for the last couple of years there's been issues and hesitations around Magento 2. However, you need to remember that that was, you know, it's a new platform, and with any new platform, there's teething issues. And Magento, through the last couple of years, has been doing great work with the community. The community got involved in helping Magento resolving issues. And actually now we're seeing with the release getting more and more stable, and actually now with the 2.2 release, we were so confident in that release that actually we've started one of our biggest projects to date on the release candidate version. So we didn't even wait for the 2.2 to be officially released before we started developing on it, and we actually had very little issues with Magento Core as for 2.2. So it's very stable at the moment, and it's definitely a good time to start looking at the migration.
Okay, thank you. We've also had a question of whether the webinar will be recorded. Obviously it has been, and we'll be sharing the recording with you afterwards. And moving on to the next question, is now a good time to re-platform, Stephen? You touched on this in your last point, but yeah, maybe just to come back to that.
Yeah, I think as Paul mentioned at the top of the actually, it was yourself, Louise, mentioned at the top of the webinar, you know, that we are moving into Magento 1 being end of life. So there is going to be some ongoing support in place for it. But I would just highlight that it is now a stronger product, and what I would say is take it as an opportunity. It is, you know, moving to Magento 1 to Magento 2 in particular, and there's some of the risk taken out of it, and re-platforming, if handled well, and you have those real business goals and those real business drivers defined, then yes, it is a very good time to be considering re-platforming, because yeah, there is. It's a great opportunity for the business to be able to assess where it is and make the most out of a new platform.
Cool. And Bob is asking, would you say you have a robust set of modules now for Magento, and are you running your sites on version 2.2? Paul, maybe you can shed some light on that?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So in terms of modules, so that's actually a great question and a good thing to highlight. For Magento 2, Magento released the Magento Marketplace, and actually to release modules on the Marketplace is a much more rigorous process than it was to release modules in the Magento Connect in the past. So we've seen the quality of the modules that's on the Marketplace is a lot higher compared to with Magento 1. And in terms of one of the obviously issues, if you like, early doors with Magento 2 was that it didn't have that many modules available compared to with Magento 1. Now with Magento 2 being a couple years old, you know, you've seen pretty much all the additional features that you've seen. You know, you go with Magento 1 modules is now available for Magento 2. And in terms of the 2.2, as I said, we've started developing on 2.2, and we haven't released anything on 2.2 yet. So I think that'll probably be set for early next year when the site's going live. But yeah, the platform is really good. We have a couple of existing, obviously, we have existing Magento 2 clients that are not on 2.2 yet, but we are working on the upgrade for that at the moment.
Okay, Thanks, Paul. And leading on from that, really, Julie is asking, is there a list of modules or features available for Magento 2?
Yeah, so in terms, I guess that's the native features that Julie talks about, and if that's the case, yes, there's some list available on the Magento site. However, if you want, we can follow up after this to provide a detailed list of the added functionality or features that's been added to Magento 2 for clarity.
Yeah. Okay. And Julie's also asking, how would you go about replatforming multiple brand websites and multiple countries? Stephen, maybe you can answer that one.
My understanding is it retains the same structure as before. But perhaps, yeah, I'm going to hand over to Paul as the platform specialist on that one. But I don't think anything specifically has changed around the site and store approach. Perhaps, Paul, you can give us a bit of an overview on that.
No, you're right. Yeah, so the migration tool allows you to actually do that. So as long as you're keeping the your site structure the same, you can use the migration tool for that as well. So it will start bringing on the brands. I guess what you'll have then is if your brands got different themes, then you obviously have a larger task at hand to develop all these different brands. And if they have that, all have different features, modules, etc., you might have a bigger task at hand. But in terms of data, it is fairly straightforward. And then maybe you can start, doing one site at a time in terms of the front end, the modules.
Okay, and Mike is asking, typically for a fairly basic website migration, how long would you expect the project to take, bearing in mind the November 2018 end of support?
Well, typically, migrations are a 3 to 6 month process normally. They usually sit within in that time period. Things can be done quicker. We can also. It also depends on the size of team you put against a task. But broadly, I would say 3 to 6 months. It should be plenty time to deliver even some of the most complex sites migration.
Okay, and Bob is asking, where do you host the majority of your client sites? Paul?
Yeah, so well, it depends on the client really, because some clients have existing relationship with their hosting partners, but we have sites that host with Rackspace and various other. With Magento 2, actually, we've used Elastera for a couple of initial builds, and now we start working with Magento Cloud as well. So yeah, so it completely depends on the client requirements. We don't host the sites ourselves, so we work with our client requirements and then advise them, provide them some a couple of options, and maybe help them or guide them when they are selecting their hosting partner.
Okay, lovely. And I think that's all the time we have. We're slowly running out of time. So I'd wrap this up and thank you everyone for joining today. Like I said, we'll make the recording available via email and share all of our insights. Thanks very much and bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.